Thank you, David, and thank you for also facilitating this conversation today with obviously yourself and Silicon Beach. I think it's a great opportunity to speak with all you guys, and yeah, really excited to see the sort of questions and to really help to tailor this conversation to you as well throughout this talk. Now, general sort of housekeeping, we'll have Jasper, who heads up or co-heads up the R&D department, running through and answering questions for you in real time if you have them as I'm speaking. But if there are any questions you'd like to save till the end, we're also going to do a Q&A session at the end, and that will be, I guess, co-hosted by myself and also Steve and Ryan. Now, just to give you a bit of background, a bit of scope in terms of who I am, my name is Trent, and I'm the director and co-founder of a company called Grant Help. And Grant Help is essentially a full suite government grants consultancy business. So we specialize in a wide variety of government grants and government programs across both state and federal levels. And we have a team of 17 here on the ground as well, I guess, grant consultants that help write these variety of different programs. And we have two sort of different departments. We've got the Research and Development Grant Department, which is headed up by Jasper and a fellow called Robert Dyring. Now, he wasn't able to make it today, but he is our resident tax agent that actually used to work for AusIndustry, assessing these grants as an auditor before going private, and is a member of our team. And then we also have joined with us today as well, which is super exciting, is Stephen Ryan, who worked for Austrade for a number of years as an auditor. And actually, Steve, I might get you to do a bit of an intro on yourself there, mate.
Okay, just very quickly, welcome to everyone today. I'm sure it'll be a great presentation, and I know you have many questions, and I've got some down the back end. So originally I was working for a major retail bank. I've worked in 3 states and a territory. Then I've moved into the government realm. I've worked on multiple programs for AusIndustry, Department of Defence, Department of Education, and I finished with Austrade. So I've got a fair bit of experience in assessing different claims and across different government programs. And hopefully I can help you today with a bit on reporting and compliance at the end of this presentation.
Fantastic. Awesome. Thanks heaps, Steve. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to, I guess, the combination of both myself and Steve kind of educating you guys today and really giving you a deep dive, me so much, I guess, about what the programs are and how you can access them. And I think Steve more so on that compliance and reporting perspective as well, with that wealth of knowledge that he has there too. Now, in terms of the flow of the conversation, as mentioned, any questions can just go straight in the chat during the conversation. Jasper will be able to answer them for you, but we will be doing a Q&A at the end. And we're going to start off with talking about the Research and Development Grant, which is obviously one of the largest year-on-year government grant programs that open and close, and a lot of you guys will probably be eligible for that, if not right now, in the future at some point. So it's a lot about preparation, and that's where we come into it. But also based on a few people in the audience who are quite interested in hearing a bit more about the Export Market Development Grant as well, we're going to loop in and do a tiny segment at the end there too, just so you guys are educated on both of these programs, because these two programs really help support you from that initial stage of the business, which is where you're at the point of actually creating a product or a software or new knowledge, through providing reimbursements back on those expenses, all the way to when you actually get to export internationally through programs like the Export Market Development Grant, in which you can provide up to $30,000 in funding for those international marketing and promotional expenses. So the reason why we'll cover off on both is because I believe that all you guys in the audience at one stage will be able to access both of these programs more likely than not, based on the sort of stage that you guys are at there as well. So let me just share my screen, guys. 1 second. Okay, beautiful. I presume that all of you guys can see that there. So yep, as mentioned, we're going to start with the Research and Development Grant and essentially provide you with, everything that you guys need in order to be able to utilize this program in order to kind of really assist your business and assist the growth of your business, and especially the innovation that comes with your business too. And as mentioned, if you've done this and you've already incurred some of these activities retrospectively, this is a retrospective program. So we could look at actually receiving reimbursements back for those past expenses. But if you're not at that stage yet, but you're just at the idea stage of your business, I guess it's very important that you really do understand this, because it means that you can prepare for it and have everything kind of ready to go for when you are able to access the program itself. Okay, beautiful. I presume that all of you guys can see that there. So yep, as mentioned, we're going to start with the research and development grant and essentially provide you with, everything that you guys need in order to be able to utilize this program in order to kind of really assist your business and assist the growth of your business and especially the innovation that comes with your business too. And as mentioned, if you've done this and you've already incurred some of these activities retrospectively, this is, or in the past, sorry, this is a retrospective program. So we could look at actually receiving reimbursements back for those past expenses. But if you're not at that stage yet, but you're just at the idea stage of your business, I guess it's very important that you really do understand this, because it means that you can prepare for it and have everything kind of ready to go for when you are able to access the program itself. Now, in terms of, who is Grant Help and who we are, I kind of briefly touched on that before, but we are, a full suite government grants consultancy business specializing in a wide variety of government grants and government programs. And we've got around 700 clients that we work with across multiple industry verticals year on year. Now, in order for you guys to kind of understand this landscape a little bit better, I'll just explain to you how government grants work. Now, they work in kind of two key ways. Now, this means you can either use government grants and government programs to claim back retrospectively on expenses you've incurred in the past through programs such as the Research and Development Grant, which we'll be discussing today. Or the other way that this works is that you can secure government grants and government funding for your future or projected expenses, which haven't actually taken place or occurred yet as well. Which, just because a few of you guys mentioned in the audience that you were at that sort of idea phase, I'll just give you an idea in terms of, a program that we worked on recently that was quite a large program too. Now, this program was under the grant, which is called the National Soil Carbon Innovation Challenge. And under this particular grant, you had to, I guess, create technologies that would reduce the cost of testing the soil organic carbon content to a lower amount than it is at the moment. And this was through kind of innovation and coming up with a new sort of product which would do this. And so we had a client that was just at the idea phase. So the sort of phase that a lot of you guys are at, and they were called Carbon Project Australia. And where they were at when we initially, found them was that they had just a concept, so an idea for a panometer, which was attached to a spectrometer, which would go into the soil to do soil organic carbon testing for the purpose of verification of carbon credits. So a very good fit for this particular program. And we ended up applying for them, and then we got them approved about 6 months later for $2.4 million to fund 80% of a $3 million project. Now, the reason why I want to mention this is because a few of you guys in the audience did say that you were at that sort of idea phase, which is pretty much the phase that they were up to. They hadn't actually started, prototyping at this point in time. They'd just done the initial designs and at the concept and at the beginning sort of phases as a business. But this large sum of funding enabled them to translate what was just an idea into the working prototype and into the field trials, and eventually, to sell both domestically and internationally too. So these forward programs, which we won't go into too much depth on today, but something that we also do, are also a good opportunity for you to look for as a business as well. And now, following on from this, another way that government grants work is that you've got sort of two different types of programs which you can access. And the ones that we're going to talk about today are the entitlement-based grants, meaning if you're eligible, you're entitled to receiving the funding, e.g. Research and Development Grant, e.g. Export Market Development Grant. Now, these programs are the grants which you really need to understand and really need to pay a lot of attention to, because if you're spending in eligible areas or on eligible activities under these programs, you are then entitled to receiving funding back. And so that's why we're really stressing that in this conversation today, because it's an eligibility and an eligibility focused program. Now, this only makes up about 1% of the 1,500 government grants that open and close throughout the year. So it's a very small sliver. And this is where I often find people going wrong, is because they'll go for the second type of program, which I'll mention now, is the competitive style programs, which make up 99% of the government grants exist. And then they'll apply for 6 applications and they'll get knocked back all 6 times. And then they'll complain that government grants aren't a good option for them, when really these competitive programs mean that you're competing against other applicants in order to receive the funding. And that's why, the combination of focusing on the entitlement-based programs where it's eligibility-based, and then utilizing, competitive programs to kind of really leverage or access larger amounts of funding. But once you're already, kind of established or have a good idea of what the business is going to do, is probably the best mechanism for you guys, moving forward as well. Now, something else also is that grant help across the board, regardless of whether it's an entitlement-based program or a competitive-based program, is a strict no win, no fee. So we only get paid when our clients get paid on a variety of different programs. And that's something that we've really built into our ethos and is a really strong part of how we've operated from day one. And that is something that's applied across the board there as well. Now, something else too, and a big sort of question that I often get asked inadvertently in a sense is, why do government grants exist, or why do certain government grants exist? And I think this is important to understand the psyche of where the government is coming from, to then also help to identify whether you as a business, are in an industry that is preferable for government grants and government funding moving forward. Because government grants exist because the government has key sorts of objectives or goals that it wants to achieve. Now, a lot of these goals get achieved through the hiring of staff or personnel that work within government to help them to, pioneer or push these objectives. However, a lot of these other ones are helped or assisted to get achieved in terms of the goals the government has through private enterprise. Now, with the research and development grant specifically, the reason why you can receive, reimbursements of up to 43.5% on your past eligible R&D expenses is because the research and development grant obviously backs and heads up these innovative products, software, and knowledge. And the government wants Australia to be at the forefront of, innovation. And that's why they're pushing this particular scheme, and they're providing reimbursements for this scheme as well. Conversely, with the Export Market Development Grant, where you provided funding for international marketing and promotion, the reason why they're doing that is because obviously when we export, we're taking money from overseas and we're bringing it back into Australia, which appreciates the overall value of our dollar and I guess affects all businesses in a positive light on the whole. Whereas when we import, we do the opposite effect where we're taking money from Australia and sending it overseas, which appreciates the overall value of our dollar. So I guess understanding why can help you to understand the psyche for the government and see that, there's lots going towards industries such as sustainability focused businesses or manufacturing focused businesses or medical focused businesses or, the circular economy focused businesses, because these are huge objectives of, both labor and liberal moving forward also. Now, in terms of a bit of an update on grant help, a really good way to kind of, I guess, represent this is to explain to you guys the different divisions that are within grant help as well. We've got the Export Market Development Grant, which is essentially our, core or our primary sort of grant program, in which we've got around 450 clients that have accessed, this particular program, and they come back year after year as well. And through this particular program, it enables you to access up to $30,000 in funding for international marketing and promotion. And we'll go through a little bit more detail in that at the end there also. And this is also kind of headed up by, Stephen Ryan too, who's come on board and has, extensive experience working for Austrade as an auditor also, and helps us as our EMDG specialist. Now, further from this, we have the Research and Development Grant, in which we've got, up to 300 clients that apply for that program year after year. And for this particular program, the majority of the clients are reoccurring, meaning if they've got a project last year, it's often that project will trail into the next year and eventually sort of adapt and change and continue to grow. So it's an accessible program year after year. And that's headed up by both Jasper Steele and also Robert Dyring, who has over 30 years of experience and actually used to work for AusIndustry as an auditor, for a number of years as well before going private too. And then we've also got our third division, which is kind of the alternative grants or the competitive sort of grants division too, which is a combination of these programs that open up on an ad hoc basis, which we also help to provide to our client base also, which is kind of rare because a lot of consultancies do tend to miss these programs, and we really try and aim to serve our clients, 2 to 3 government grants per year, and that's why we also look at these particular programs as well, and we move very quickly on these programs too. So recently, one of the ones that we did was an energy efficiency grant in which we had 42 applicants, and it was served on a first in, first served basis, and we had some of the first submissions or the very early submissions in both Victoria, New South Wales, South Australia, and also Queensland there too. And with this particular grant, you received $25,000 in funding for 100% of building upgrades that increase the energy efficiency of the building. So this was a huge sort of program that we assisted our clients with too. Now, further from this, we also had another grant, which was the Boosting of Female Founders Program. And we had 2 grants approved on a competitive basis, which was a 1.38% acceptance rate across the board. And with this particular program, we had one client called Simply Stakeholders, who we got $400,000 for to expand into the US and actually open a division there, which was huge. And then also another client called Butterfly Systems, who we got $365,000 for to essentially trial out their fluid balance monitoring systems in hospitals there in New South Wales there also as well. Now, aside from this, we've also assisted in 20 other sort of government grants programs, across the board. So there's a huge scope in what we can access and what we can help you with too. Now, let's get stuck into the research and development grant side of things, and I guess educating you guys on this particular program and helping you to not only access it, but provide you with the tools, the systems, and the knowledge in order to prepare for it for future sort of claims there also. Now, in terms of, what actually is the research and development grant itself, as a brief sort of overview, the research and development grant reimburses innovative research and development of new products, new software, or new knowledge. Now, this is a multi-billion-dollar initiative that supports thousands of businesses each year. And this essentially means that if you are undertaking eligible R&D, and if you're, kind of contributing to our innovation economy, the government then shares the burden of the risk by providing reimbursements on these expenses, which ideally, as you grow and you commercialize this R&D, and then that actually gets then put out into the market, and people then purchase your product and you become profitable, their profits then flow back through the government, and that's where they receive their sort of reimbursements from it also as well down the line, is once you kind of become profitable. But the reason why this program is so important is because it does help to provide either tax offsets or cash injections back into the business, and obviously cash flow is such a huge important aspect, especially for these early stage businesses as well. Now, in order to be eligible for this program, you do need to be creating new knowledge also, and that means that you need to be kind of bridging the knowledge gap between both prior and future knowledge. And also, to be eligible for this program, also you must be making a product or a software or creating new knowledge that does not exist within the market. So essentially, this is where you do want to kind of have that sort of world first component also. And following on from this too, you do want to be working through kind of an iterative process where you kind of trial and erroring across the way, and you're going step-by-step process from the start, which is where many of you guys might be, which is that idea phase, all the way into ideation, and then concepting, and then building, and then releasing that MVP or releasing that base sort of product, and then continuing to innovate down the line there as well. And as I have mentioned, this is a retrospective program, meaning you are reimbursed for expenses that took place in the previous financial year. So, really have a think about whether, once you do hear the rest of this too, about whether you have actually undertaken any eligible R&D from the 1st of July 2022 to the 30th of June 2023, which is last financial year, because there could be the potential for you to claim back reimbursements on that also. Now, in terms of R&D sort of eligibility, the R&D must show high levels of technical risk, new knowledge, and considerable novelty. So you do need to be kind of undertaking something in which that end result is quite uncertain as well, and you don't essentially know what it is prior. And so the way that I like to kind of describe this in terms of the difference between, what is considered sort of R&D and I guess what would be considered not R&D as well, would be referencing that example of if you were to build a website, for instance. So if you're building a website, and let's just say, for argument's sake, you're using a pre-existing API such as WordPress or Wix in order to build that website, you know that if you use this template and you put these words in here, and you put this heading here, and you put some photos in here, that before you even do it, you can kind of determine what that end outcome would be. And in that particular case, that wouldn't be deemed true R&D, because you can't say the end result is uncertain, and the end result, if anything, was very predictable, and you're not really working through, or you're not really allowing for any sort of technical risk in that particular example. Now, conversely, looking at that same example, but looking at the companies of like WordPress or Wix, or the people that actually, use Python programming or whatever it was to build the code from scratch to create the API itself. In that case, if you're building the code from scratch and you've literally got programmers on the floor that are working on this, well, then you're the end person that would actually be eligible for the R&D. And so that's a really good way to kind of think about it and to understand the difference between, something where there is technical risk and something where there probably isn't technical risk, and understanding your eligibility for what sort of project would be allowable as well. Now, further from this, you must be a company, and that's a proprietary limited PTY Ltd. This is really, really important. So no trusts, they're not eligible. No partnerships are eligible, and no sole traders are eligible as well. I mean, I had a client recently who was actually working and had a massive wine production facility out in regional Victoria there as well, where he spent $40 million on creating this manufacturing facility for processing wines for a number of different wineries in the region. And so obviously, a large amount of that, millions of dollars would be eligible for R&D and would be eligible based activities. But when we did our initial due diligence, and we looked into it, we did notice that he actually was registered as a trust, which was something that was probably advised by his accountants. But maybe they created that structure before they realized the sort of business that he would be in, the amount of eligible R&D he'd be undertaking. And this then precluded him from being able to access the research and development grant as well, purely due to this company structure. So again, if you're in these early sorts of stages, please speak to your accountant before setting up the business that you're looking to set up, because some accountants might recommend a trust, for instance, and just mention to them that this is a program that maybe you are looking at going for and you are looking at accessing, and then talk to them about the tax implications of what happens if you are set up as a trust or if you set up as a company, in order to make sure you structure correctly and you are able to claim there also as well. Now, further from this, the minimum expenditure for research and development grant is $20,000. So that's the minimum amount you can spend in order to put through an application for this program. I guess the caveat on that is if you are spending less than $20,000, it would need to be through a research service provider, which is someone such as a university. They're registered by the government essentially in order to provide services less than $20,000 for you to claim through the R&D. But again, traditionally, $20,000 is the minimum expenditure cap, but we often recommend that clients are spending more around, say, $80,000 plus, for looking at this program in order for it to be a really good kind of option for them as well. And the maximum amount that you can receive a reimbursement back of is $150 million also. Now, further from this, a really, really big point, and I do want to stress this, is that the expenditure must be incurred within Australia. Now, this is really important because, it can't just be expenditure that's incurred within Australia, third party, like a third party contractor or a third party company. It also needs to be the end people rendering the R&D need to be Australian-based people as well, or people that are based in Australia. And this is something that I think often gets missed too, especially if you're, say, a software business. I've seen this quite commonly where you will be creating a new software, so maybe a new app hypothetically, and you're using a third-party developer to make the software for you, and you're paying them, and they're an Australian business. So sometimes people think, oh, great, well, I'm paying a proprietary limited, I'm paying an Australian business, it's registered in New South Wales. Well, this must be eligible then, and I'll be able to apply for it. But often when we do our due diligence and we do this double check, which we always do, we do want to see the end people that are actually rendering the work. And, I wouldn't say more often than not, but just from my experience, from what I've seen, a lot of the time, especially in software, a lot of these third-party companies that are building your, software essentially, yes, you're speaking to an Australian representative or an Australian agent who's your back and forth, almost like an account manager. But if you get the breakdown and the scope of work, you can sometimes see that, 90% or a large percentage of that work has actually been rendered overseas. And in that case, we'd need to apportion out all those ineligible expenses which are incurred offshore, and then just look at the expenses which are incurred onshore, which can really, kind of hit a lot of people pretty hard if they're expecting the R&D grant, but then didn't actually understand where the end people were based. So moral of the story, if you're using third-party contractors, find out who's actually going to be rendering the work. It's great for you to know, but it's really also important for the reporting purposes with the R&D. Now, finally, I really also just want to discuss the component of IP ownership, and that you must be the owner of the end intellectual property for your software, product, knowledge, etc. Because this is where understanding and reading agreements is really important, especially if you're a startup and maybe you're at that stage where you don't really want to hire a lawyer to look over an agreement, or you think that everything's just fine, that you'll move ahead, especially when dealing with reputable universities, which I won't name, but some of the biggest universities in Australia actually do this too. And what that is within their engagements, they'll sometimes, even though you're paying them, they'll put in that engagement that X university will actually be the end owner of the intellectual property, even though you're paying them to do the work, which I presume is because it has benefits for them down the line with claiming for programs like the R&D or something like that as well, because if you're the end owner of the intellectual property, you're eligible for this particular program too. But a big key thing with that is make sure you read your engagements with third-party contractors, third-party suppliers, doesn't matter if they're a software company or a university. I've seen it time and time again where people think they're the end owner of the intellectual property, but they're actually not. So that's really, really important too. Yeah. Now, further from this, I just want to kind of run you through now the different sort of reimbursement levels that you can access through this particular program too, because through the R&D, you're either entitled to a tax offset, which can be claimed through your company's tax return, or cash back for eligible R&D expenditure. Now, this is kind of broken up into two different categories based on the amounts that you're essentially making, or the revenue of the business. So if the revenue of the business is under $20 million, and if you're running at a profit, then it is an 18.5% reimbursement on eligible R&D expenses. Conversely, if your business is running at a loss, then it is actually a 43.5% reimbursement on your past eligible expenses. So in this example, for $100,000 of eligible R&D, hypothetically speaking, if you're running at a profit, it would be an $18,500 reimbursement. However, if you're running at a loss, it would be a $43,500 reimbursement back as well. So this can kind of get you thinking in terms of, how much you may be eligible to receive reimbursements on in your past expenses, or even just understand the sort of implications of this program moving forward, and the sort of revenue level that you're at, so you know what you're going to be able to access. Now, further from this, if you are running at revenue that is over the $20 million bracket, it then becomes a tax offset. And so essentially it is a 13.5% tax offset if you're running at a profit, and it becomes the 38.5% tax offset if you're running at a loss there too. So this becomes, again, the measure that you can use depending on whether you're doing less or more than that revenue there as well. Now, in terms of the required documentation, I guess we'll call it the financial analysis of this particular program too, we do need to see if we're looking at your retrospective expenses over last financial year, your profit and loss statement from last financial year, so the FY23. Now, in this, obviously you have, the list of all the different expenses that will show up on the general ledger there as well. And so we can then, kind of identify or ascertain some potential different areas of that profit and loss statement that we can then get the general ledger for too, which will break down and provide an itemized list of all the eligible expenses, under that particular category, in which we'll have to then determine or identify and justify the eligibility for each of these different expenses that take place as well. Now, we also will need, the team will also need a balance sheet too, which you may be able to claim things such as depreciation on also. And another really sort of important component there is the year-to-date earnings of the staff that are actually working on the R&D project too. And when you do get the year-to-date earnings in terms of the staff that are working on the project, we do kind of want to see also the percentage of time that they're actually spending on the R&D, because more often than not, it is very rare that you have a staff member who's spending 100% of time on the R&D. At times they might be doing other things which are not related to the project, e.g. administration, or as an extreme example, like sales support or something like that too. And so understanding the percentage of time that's worked out on an hourly basis each week that they're actually spending on the R&D is super important, because it means that we're only claiming for eligible R&D. We're not claiming for any ineligible expenses, which are not, explicitly allowed under the program there also. Now, further from this, it's really good to kind of understand the important documentation that's required for this particular grant also, because, one of the key things that I always like to say with these sort of government grant programs as well is that, if you want to dance with the government, you've got to play to their tune. And a big thing that they want to see, in these particular programs is they do want to see that you do have the supporting documentation, the supporting evidence also, which is really, really important. And, a lot of this stuff seems super simple and it can, but it's something that sometimes can get missed, and it makes it really hard for us to work with clients that don't have the appropriate supporting documentation. So things such as photos of and videos of the experiments or the prototyping, for instance, take photos along the way. Now, the reason why I like this is because it really helps with supporting that systematic step-by-step approach, the iterative approach, where you're kind of working away from the start all the way through to that end sort of product. So make sure if you can, just do take as many of those as possible. Retaining things such as samples and prototypes, that's really important too, to kind of retain these. And if they do want to kind of do an audit or come out on site, you do have these things on hand that you can show them. Further from this, contracts with third parties. Again, I mentioned it before, read the contracts, understand the contracts, and just make sure that you have contracts with all the different third parties you're using, because, a contract or a letter of engagement stipulates the work often or the service deliverables that you will be undertaking. And we often lean on or reference the contracts, in order to justify and substantiate the percentage of that contract that would be eligible for the R&D. Further from this, records of the resources that we used in the project, e.g. asset usage logs, and also, if you've got sort of raw materials you're using, make sure you log that sort of stuff as well. Further from this, the experimental designs, that's really, really important to hold onto that too. And then just to fly through these ones, project records like NAB lab notebooks, design documents, records of trials and progress reports, minutes of project meetings, test protocols, test results, analysis of test results and conclusions, as well as tax invoices and staff timesheets. Now, depending on whether you're in the product sector or you're in the software sector, or you're in, for instance, the knowledge bucket sector or that new knowledge sector, it's going to be a different version of these types of documents that will be, a really good fit for your business and a really tailored fit for the supporting documents. And that's why a really big thing that we do at Grant Help as well is that we create a bit of a documentation stack for you. And this stack is curated and tailored to you. And that's the different sort of documents that you will need for your particular industry in order to be quite compliant when it comes to AusIndustry and the requirements for the program and any sort of potential audits that may take place as well. Now, moving on, just want to touch here on the R&D compliance essentials, which have been essentially broken up into 4 points and is super important because obviously, this is a huge sort of government grant program, and they do want to ensure that businesses are compliant and that they do have the right documentation. And that's what we help to structure you with as well, especially if you're at the beginning of your project. This is what we spend a lot of our time sort of curating and helping you with moving forward. So initially, that point 1 there is the key record keeping sort of guidelines component, which means that you need to maintain records that verify the R&D activity nature. So this is like the actual nature of the R&D and kind of what you're doing, talking about what the experiments are, talking about what the tests are, all that sort of stuff is really, really important to help to justify the R&D activity. Because if you just talk about having, or if you just have materials of the start idea, and then you just have materials at the very end, but you don't show the stuff that happens in between, it is very actually hard to kind of justify the true R&D component on that as well. Further from this, R&D expenditure, it needs to be properly kind of tabled or retained. Now, a way that you can do this is from hypothetically making like a general ledger, which contains certain expenses that relate to a specific R&D project, and that could be represented then in your online accounting system, e.g. Xero. That's one way I've seen clients do it. It's a pretty good way of doing it too. And then also further from this, you do want to maintain that expenditure activity link as well. So you want to show that the expenses actually relate to the R&D activity that we say that we're going to be applying for as well. There needs to be that sort of direct link. So if you do have, moving forward to the next point, staff that are working on the R&D project too, there needs to be a direct link towards that staff member their JD or their sort of description of their role and what they're doing towards the R&D too. And this is why it's really important to track the employee time, because employees often make up one of the largest sectors of the research and development grant program itself. And so this means you do need to log the employee R&D time regularly. And ideally, you can use tools such as timesheets or spreadsheets, which we've got some really great templates on file. So feel free to reach out to the team if you'd like those ones as well. But further from this, you want to then be retaining the records that show what the employees have actually been doing and how they've been contributing to the project itself. So that could be in the form of, weekly or monthly sort of logs of activity breakdowns and activity schedules of, what has this employee been doing, how have they been contributing to the R&D also. And further from this, you want to have really clear contracts and agreements with your staff members. And in the service deliverables of these agreements, it's often good to kind of show their job description and to help that relate back to the R&D project as well, if they are working on it too. Now, further from this, there are two sort of key types of records that the government's looking for here. And these are contemporaneous records, which are made during the R&D planning and execution. Now, obviously, these are the most preferred mechanisms because these are the R&D records that are taking place as the R&D is actually happening. E.g., I was mentioning it before, things like photos, that would be contemporaneous if you're taking photos throughout the financial year, exhibiting what you've been doing as the R&D. Conversely, the other type of records that they have is the non-contemporaneous records, which is the made up of post-activity information. Now, this is not as, we'll call it preferable, but it is sort of still relevant too. And often we might do something, for instance, such as a statement of facts, which helps to, after the fact, justify and explain what has taken place over a period of time if you haven't taken the results during that period. But again, step one, looking at the contemporaneous records is really the sort of preferable thing here. And that's what we recommend our clients to do too, to be very prepared. Now, fourth and final, you do need to be ready to showcase to AusIndustry or to the ATO if there is an audit that takes place too. And, audits are definitely increasing and they're getting higher and higher. And that's because the ATO and the AusIndustry continue to increase their due diligence for this particular program. And that's why you do need to be prepared and you do need to be ready to show the R&D undertakings, show them what you've done. You need to be able to show them the incurred expenses. You must ensure that the invoices that you're claiming for instance, have actually been paid, before you're able to claim back for the R&D too, and then further from this, there needs to be that expenditure activity relationship that's very clear, where we can so quickly and easily identify how a certain expenditure, whether it's a third-party contractor, whether it's raw materials, whether it's employee, for instance, and how that relates back to the R&D itself. And that's why, again, so much of this really comes down to the preparation piece, and that's really important as well. Now, further from this, just to run through some of the eligible expenses from R&D and ones that you can often kind of look at claiming for under these individual categories too. You got software development and software and testing. So whether it's a third-party contractor or whether you got programmers in-house, this is a really big category under that software development component. But again, you do need to be building the software from scratch. You do need to have the actual programmers, either building the software from scratch or building the integrations for the APIs from scratch. That's really important. Further from this, you've got the general sort of prototyping costs and the experimental costs as well. Then following on, there's general development, and then also there's depreciation of assets or equipment depreciation too, which is again why we need the balance sheet, which helps to represent that as well. Further from this, there's the staff salaries and staff wages piece. So again, you're going to want to be keeping really good records for the staff salaries, staff wages, what they're doing, how much time they're spending on it. And then also third-party contractors, which is a huge one, who are contributing to the project, which I briefly touched on before as well. And then there's also the rent and the sort of overheads that are involved that we can look at kind of claiming for, but are often apportioned based on the amount of staff members or the percentage of staff members that are working on the R&D. And then finally, you've got the raw materials that are involved in the R&D project there as well. Now, in terms of the ineligible expenses, which I'll just really quickly run over too, Things such as research in social science and arts, that is not eligible. Activities mainly for the mining industry, such as prospecting, exploring, or drilling for minerals or petroleum is not eligible as well. Developing, modifying, or customizing computer software for internal administration within the business, that is not eligible. Commercial, legal, administrative, and aspects of patenting. So if you're hiring a lawyer to help you register your intellectual property, although that's such a key part of an R&D project to protect your intellectual property, those expenses are not eligible, unfortunately. Compliance activities, not eligible. Management studies and market research are also not eligible as well. Now, just in terms of the key dates, you kind of have an understanding of how this particular program works and when you'd be potentially paid for it. The AusIndustry application time at the moment is about 40 business days in order to getting approved for first-time applicants. But then further from this, if you have already accessed the program in the past, it is, a bit quicker. It's often within sort of 20 business days if you're within 6 months of the 1st of July, or between 80 business days if you're 6 months or after the, we'll call it the first of July, which would be kind of just January moving forward. And in terms of the closing date for this particular program, it is April of 2024. That's when it actually closes there also as well. Now, quickly, just want to kind of touch on the Export Market Development Grant here too, before passing on to Steve there as well. And again, the Export Market Development Grant provides 50% reimbursements on international marketing and promotion, in which you can receive up to $30,000 through that program for up to $60,000 of international marketing and promotional expenses. Now, in terms of the program eligibility, you do need to be obviously exporting internationally or targeting and marketing internationally, and then also have an Australian-made or an Australian designed product also. So this is why the R&D and the Export Market Development Grant work so nicely together, because if you create an Australian-based product or software or knowledge, you're then eligible for the R&D. And then once that's commercialized and you're looking to then, send this product internationally, you can then access the Export Market Development Grant and will be eligible as well. Now, further from this, you do need to be doing less than $20 million in annual expenses. So just consider that also as well. And in terms of the eligible expenses or the common expenditures under this particular program, think anything that is even remotely related to international marketing and promotion. So for instance, diversified sales channels, SEOs, Google AdWords, social media spend. If it's targeted internationally, this is eligible. Or if you're looking to hire an overseas representative in an overseas market, or maybe you're looking at making some marketing trips internationally and actually visiting some different countries overseas, that would be eligible as well. And I guess just look at any of those activities that you're undertaking or planning to undertake as a business that even remotely relate to international marketing and promotion. And this is then a really sort of great program for you guys to kind of look at accessing as well. Now, depending on the tier that you're in, there's different levels of funding, but you've got tier 1, which is that new to export category, in which you're entitled to $12,000 from the government for a total $24,000 international marketing spend. You then have tier 2, which is if you're just kind of expanding your presence in the current markets, which is $20,000 from the government for a total $40,000 international marketing spend. And then we have tier 3, which is that expanding your reach into even different markets and targeting different countries. And that's the maximum tier of funding, which is $30,000 from the government for a total $60,000 international marketing spend. And so, yeah, just touching on that one, obviously a very brief overview. If you want to hear more about that program, organize a time to speak with, myself, for instance, or Steve or somebody else on the team, and we can brief you on that too. Now, Steve, I'd love for you to just spend a bit of time kind of touching on the compliance and the reporting piece for the Export Market Development Grant there also. And this piece too will have a nice sort of overlap with R&D, because obviously they're two different government departments, but they do work quite similar with one another. So Steve, I'll just pass that on to you there, mate, as well. Cheers.
Thanks very much, Trent, for a very comprehensive presentation on R&D. Now, people say about EMDG, what does it stand for? Well, we know it's the Export Market Development Grant, but some cheeky people out there say, easy money, do get some. And that's the way it can be, if you get an understanding. So let's talk about reporting and compliance. This also applies not only to EMDG, but other government grants. You'll find that EMDG is an evidence-based scheme. So if you have written contemporaneous evidence, meaning as you go, you'll develop your emails, you'll develop reports, you'll have also those supporting documents. So for example, we see there letters of engagement with service providers. So these are the sorts of things that the assessors in different agencies will take Austrade, for example, with EMDG. They would like to see the nature of the service provided and the T's and C's, terms and conditions. And that will give us an understanding and also what the payment arrangements are. Are they based on a fee? Is it a salary? Is it a commission? Commissions generally are not allowable. Let's move on to travel documentation. Because you're also claiming this from the ATO would say on their website that you'll need to provide us evidence. And that evidence generally would be invoices from travel agents, also with hotels, credit cards, that type of thing. Just because you have a travel itinerary doesn't actually mean you traveled, because as we all know, that can change. The daily activity reports, these are generally electronic. People use calendars or emails. So what we normally like to see as far as in the assessment or preparation of these claims is that you've been corresponding with a potential buyer overseas. You may also meet with these people, and you'll have some post email, obviously to do with the discussion on how that went. So these types of supporting documents are very, very essential, very vital. Also, we'd suggest that you set up a special purpose general ledger. What this means is if you want to claim any of the 10 different eligibility categories, you'll set up a general ledger in the profit and loss accounts to identify these, and makes it just so easier at the end of the financial year to extract that data. For example, if you pay an overseas rep or marketing consultant, or you have literature and advertising, that is all internationally based, that's the purpose. You would create a special purpose ledger for that. Tax returns and the BAS, you'll get these done. It's important you make arrangements if you need to with the ATO to how often you might submit. I'm going to touch quickly also on employee superannuation contributions. You'll find the government of the day, they're going to enforce that every time an employee receives wages, there's the evidence that the employer has made a contribution for superannuation. Debt collection. This one here, it's not on the list, but very quickly, with debt collection, do collect your debts, try and collect them as soon as you can. Don't blow them out to beyond 60 and 90 days. As an ex-banker, we would be considering that's along the line of a bad debt, and especially trying to chase debts that are that old, very, very difficult. Business models and revenue models. Let's talk quickly about this. Business models, do you have a business plan? What are the products you're promoting? What target markets do you have? And what's going to be your advertising expenses? To do with the revenue model, you should have some basic plan to see what your sources of income are, whether it's going to be direct sales, subscriptions, or service fees, license fees. How do you know if you're making a profit? So you look at your general profit, hopefully that's a good margin in there. Then you look at your expenses and your net profit, because at the end of the day, the government wants to see a net benefit to the Australian taxpayer, so to the payer. So evidence-based, written containment documents have good records that will support you if you have to take things further beyond an assessment or an appeal stage. And that's all I've got.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Steve. That was really comprehensive. And again, guys, I can't stress enough, with these programs, the most important thing is really understanding the programs well, so that you can then understand what's eligible and then really start to follow these sort of compliance and reporting components too. Because, whether you're doing it yourself or whether you're using a consultant, there is still, some sort of work or effort that needs to take place on your end naturally. And so ensure that you do, pay a lot of attention to that. And we do have information packs for both the Research and Development Grant and the Export Market Development Grant, specifically around reporting and compliance, which you can share with you guys as well. Now, in terms of Grant Help's overall services, and I guess essentially what we do, we work with the client to educate them on the government grant opportunity and I guess the eligibility for it and how they can access it. We then go and assess the financial eligibility too. So we'll see, what sort of expenses you've incurred and how those expenses would be eligible and what sort of documentation you have to substantiate that. Then further from this, we then write your technical analysis. Now, This is the document that describes the research and development grant or research and development activities which actually took place that we work very closely with you with to help create. And then also we help to submit on your behalf through Rhett Dyring, who's our resident sort of tax agent there too, who'd be representing you guys too through any other sort of audits or any other sort of ongoing support that you guys need there as well. Now, further from this, when it comes to booking a time with us, one of our R&D consultants will reach out to you guys too, potentially on LinkedIn, to see if we can arrange a time. And in this eligibility call, we can help to understand your business, which is something that we do and we spend a lot of time on, because we really want to understand everything your business is doing, what you're spending on the past and what you're spending on the future, so we can present and bring you government grant opportunities that are really tailored for you guys there as well. And that's where that sort of grant analysis piece comes into it also. And then we also help you to ascertain and discuss these different sort of R&D activities you're undertaking, whether they be retrospectively or whether they be forward in the future with future sort of projects that you're taking place also as well. And so now, guys, I'd love to open it up to some questions as well. If you've got any questions that are directed towards myself or any that are directed towards anybody else, please let me know too. I'm just having a quick look here. I think there is here saying that, will I have to refund the percentage of the R&D grant? So a lot of these different government grants and government programs, whether it's the R&D or the EMDG, it's kind of like funds which is non-dilutable equity. So the government gives you funds or reimbursements back on expenses, but they're not to be essentially paid back through those particular expenses there as well. It's non-dilutable equity. David, you've just raised your hand there as well, mate. Feel free to answer a question there too.
I'm not here to answer a question. I'll leave the expertise to you.
So I was going to say, ask a question. That was it. Yep.
Actually, I have a question. I have multiple questions, but I do not want to take all of the time. But first, getting started, a lot of digital agencies, when you talk to them, they tell you, yeah, our developers are overseas, but our architects are here in Australia. So we basically get we trick it that it looks like 80% of the work is done in Australia. So how much responsibility do I have as the person that is hiring that company to check that what they claim is correct?
Of course. I mean, the onus of, understanding the eligibility of whether you can apply is really on you as the applicant too, because at the end of the day, it's not the marketing company or the software company that's going to be getting, in trouble if it's incorrect. It's really you as the business who, will have to pay back these funds to the department and who will be, essentially, potentially prohibited from accessing the grant in the future if it's done in a certain way too. So the onus is on you, especially for the research and development grant, to understand who is rendering the work for you. And I'd recommend doing this, at that point of the letter of engagement, because yes, a lot of these companies might look like they've got a really big Australian presence, but if they're just doing a small amount of things for the R&D project, such as the architecture, as you mentioned, or maybe if it's a software doing the UX UI, well, we can only claim for that piece, and then everything else that's offshored, we won't be able to claim for too. So again, recommendation is, before getting engaged with a third-party contractor in Australia, understand preemptively who's going to be doing the work. Please provide a breakdown. Where are these individuals based? That's really, really important. And then that's the sort of evidence that we present to the department too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Now, I think, Elise, you've got your hand up there as well.
Yes, thanks. Just for the R&D tax incentive, I have heard of a situation where someone was considering loaning themselves, like their startup, a certain amount so they could pay themselves a salary with it because it was pre-revenue. There was no other income otherwise. And then they claimed a portion of that salary under the R&D tax incentive. Does that seem above board to you or a little bit murky?
No, it's something that does happen, because if you are sort of creating a new entity, which is for a new business, like for instance, a software company, and it's a software startup, like you're building an app, well, more than likely than not, you don't want to bundle that in with your current business. It will be under sort of a new business, which is directly for that. And that means that that business might have, no expenses running through it because they're pre-revenue. And then also that there will be things such as staff salaries and staff wages. But something else they kind of like to look at as well is the agreements with that person person and exactly what that person's doing to contribute towards the R&D project too. Because if you're claiming, you know, that you're working a 40-hour week or you're getting paid all this money through this secondary entity and that you're working on the R&D project, but then you're managing a multi-million dollar business on the side as well that's making all this money, and that you're the CEO and that you're making all these decisions for it too. If you really break it down and you look at the amount of time that's contributing towards the R&D project itself, in that case, well, it's really hard to justify you're working, you know, that 40-hour week to justify getting 100% of your, you know, time and wages reimbursed through the grant also. So that's where, you know, record keeping and those timesheets and tracking the work and the involvement that you have with the R&D is really important, especially if you have a situation like that there as well. Yeah,
thanks for that. You mentioned about sharing a timesheet template or example. Were you planning to share that in the recording link, or where would we find that?
What we'll do, I'll just double check with David as well, because usually with these conversations or these talks, there's a list at the end where we can see the emails, and some people want to receive, you know, a follow-up email from us and they've ticked yes on that, and then other people don't want to receive one too, and obviously we won't send through collateral if you don't want that also, which is completely fine. But what I'll make sure I do as well, specifically for you, Elise, and anyone else that wants to ask us anything, you know, shoot an email to myself, which is, you know, trent@granthelp.com.au, or jasper@granthelp.com.au. So Jasper, maybe if you could put those two emails in the chat there also. And if you want to receive any you know, follow-up information from us, we'd be more than happy to send that through to you guys there as well, including for you at least that timesheets, and we'll send through a compliance and reporting document that's we've got on file also as well. Beautiful.
Great, thanks.
Hey, Caitlin, so you've got your hand up there as oh, where'd you go? No?
I do indeed. Here I am.
Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Firstly, thank you everyone for such an informative presentation. I really enjoyed hearing all you had to say about what you do. I was curious, you mentioned, you made reference to two different grants that you have worked on in sort of outside of the EMDG space. So the Boosting Female Founders and then also a resource grant. Could you give me a sense of some of the other grants you've worked on, just for the benefit of everyone as well?
Most definitely. So traditionally, the grants come under sort of three different sectors, three different primary sectors. So grants that relate to innovation. For instance, there was a grant called the MVP Ventures Fund, which was up to $200,000 in funding for a co-contribution of $200,000 from the client as well, which is for startups that were doing less than $1 million in annual revenue and had staff between 1 to 19 and that sort of stuff too. So that's one that we specialized in as well. That one was also interestingly an entitlement-based program, and they actually wouldn't call it canned it halfway through, but they put that on pause. They're looking to reopen it quite.
In New South Wales, yeah.
I may or may not be familiar. It sounds like you're familiar with that one, Caitlin. So it's a bit of a very okay, cool. So that's one of the ones that we did too, and we'll call it the innovation bracket type grants. And then following on from that, you have the export style grants as well, which is similar to the export market development grant, but often administered on a state basis. So we're talking the e-commerce grant program in Queensland, that was $10,000 from the government, no co-contribution. The New South Wales export assistance grant, where we helped out around 320 businesses access that program, and it was only $10,000 from the government for a total $20,000 international marketing spend, but the payout times are only about sort of 1 week, and clients, you know, it's a big value add that clients didn't know existed. And then also in Victoria, the Victorian Global Gateway Program, which is $50,000 from the government for a $12,500 co-contribution from the business as well. So that's your export-based pillar, right? And then you've also got, following on from that, we'll call it the wage subsidy pillars. And this is one that's really exciting because we assisted around 1,000 staff, you know, across the country, across a number of different businesses access this particular program. And this is one that was really missed, I would say, by the, we'll call it the white collar industry across the board. Now, the reason being, it was called the Boosting Apprenticeships Commencements Program. And under this program, you could receive a $28,000 reimbursement back for, you know, up to, say, like staff salaries and staff wages, or a 50% reimbursement. And following on from this, they also had to be doing education. They also had to be doing training. And so we were able to get often subsidized courses for courses that were at a Cert Level 2 or above. So Cert 3 in hospitality, Cert 3 in business, Cert 4 in leadership management, you know, Cert 3 in tourism, for instance. There are examples of ones like that. And I mean, we worked with everyone, like a really big portion of people and big portion of companies to help them access this program, in which massive companies like the Marriott Hotel Group, for instance, instance, weren't advised by their C-suite of this particular program, because when people see things such as, the word apprenticeships, they think here's another multi-billion-dollar initiative to support the trade industry. But when really apprenticeships cover things such as traineeships, and traineeships are anything at a cert level 2 or above, which covers multiple industry verticals. So we were probably the largest consultancy to pick up that program as well. And then also the energy efficiency grant, that's obviously another huge one, which I touched on before too. And then a number of different ad hoc grants as well. Like one recently that we did was the Emerging Aviation Technology Partnerships Program, where we were going for, $2 million in funding for a total $4 million project to create, a world first electric propulsion aeroplane, which is the first that's going to be developed and the full solution in Australia. And that was a really big one there too. So very wide variety, very wide scope. And again, that's why we split the business up into these different pillars as well, because, R&D, Robert Dyring being the ex-government official in that sector, he's the absolute expert. EMDG, Stephen Ryan's the absolute expert in that as well, also being ex-government auditor too. And then these different divisions of these ad hoc, entitlement-based programs, they're great to go for as well, coupled with obviously then these larger competitive grant programs for very specialized types work and that sort of thing too. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question there, Caitlin.
It sure does. Thanks for the clarification. And I'm going to need to duck off the call, but thank you so much, everyone, for that. That was very informative.
That's all good. That's all good. Now, just having another quick look here, guys, if there's any sorts of other questions, but it looks like we're all answered there, which is fantastic. So again, really appreciate all of you guys taking the time, and I think David will be making the this recording available to everyone, and I'll also send out a bit of a information pack from the team. So if you want to connect with us and chat further, or just receive the resources, you can. And yeah, looking forward with catching up with you all at one of David's next events, or one of the pitch nights or something like that too. It'd be super exciting. And as always, appreciate all of you guys taking the time. And Steve, thanks a lot, mate, as well. Jasper, appreciate you answering those questions there in the comments. And David, thank you as always. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All three of you, it was great. A lot of knowledge we shared. And I actually think what is probably missing is that it is actually a great opportunity to engage early with you for early stage businesses to actually get their documentation on track from the very get-go. When I think of my previous career in industry, if you're ISO 9001 or 1401 certified, all this documentation happens automatically, right? And you're very organized. But as an early stage business, talking to you, learning about this documentation, that helps you so much in getting your operations straight as well from the get-go. It makes it so much easier later on. That's it. Awesome. Thank you all very much, and looking forward to the next time. Thanks heaps, guys. See you later. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a good day.